The first time my mother told me my sister had potential, and I didn't. I was 8 years old. Standing in our dining room with a spelling test in my hand and the smell of overcooked green beans coming from the kitchen. The last time my parents said anything like that, we were both in graduation gowns. My sister smiling for pictures she thought would prove them right. And my name was already printed somewhere. They had not bothered to look. By the time they finally did, nobody in my family knew where to put their faces. Let me take you back. If this story resonates with you, like and subscribe, but only if it feels true to something you have lived. I grew up in a split-level house outside Columbus, Ohio, with a cracked basketball hoop in the driveway. Beige carpet, my mother vacuumed in perfect diagonal lines. And a family language built almost entirely out of comparison. My sister, Vanessa, was 2 years older than me. She was beautiful early. That mattered more in our house than anyone liked to admit. She had thick, dark hair that always looked styled, even when it was not. A fast smile, long legs, and the kind of social confidence teachers described as leadership before they had enough evidence. I was the other one. Quieter, smaller, good with routines, good with details. The child who noticed when the grocery total was higher than usual, or when my father's jaw set a certain way before a bad week at work. My name is Elise. In my family, that name usually came after a pause. Vanessa was the kind of child adults predicted things for. She'll go far. She has something. She could do anything. I heard those sentences so often growing up that they became part of the wallpaper. What I heard about myself was softer. She's steady. She's sweet. She tries hard. If you've ever grown up beside a favorite child, you know exactly how violent the word steady can become. It sounds kind. It means limited. It means useful. It means no one expects a miracle from you. So, no one feels guilty when they stop investing. My father, Howard, sold commercial roofing contracts for a regional company and believed in winners in the way insecure men often do. Not morally. Aesthetically. He liked people who looked like they belonged at the front of rooms. My mother, Linda, taught piano lessons from our living room and had a talent for saying harmful things in a voice calm enough to make you doubt your own reaction. Neither of them were monsters. That would have been easier. They loved us both in the general. Food on the table. Birthdays remembered. Dentist appointment kept sense. But they believed in Vanessa. And they managed me. That was the difference. At 7, Vanessa forgot a line in the church Christmas pageant and turned the mistake into a joke, so charming the audience laughed and applauded. My father told everyone for a week that she had natural stage presence. At 7, I got every answer right in our class, Geography B, and came home with a ribbon that curled slightly at the edges. My mother smiled, pinned it to the fridge, and said, "That's wonderful. Honey, see? Hard work really pays off for some children." For some children. Even then, I knew what she meant. Vanessa dazzled. I compensated. That was the family equation. It got worse when school started giving us numbers. Grades. Rankings. Teacher comments. Talent, placement. Honor rolls. Vanessa was bright. Genuinely. Quick with language. Great in discussion. excellent at sounding impressive in rooms where adults only half listened. But she was inconsistent. Always had been. She would get an A on a paper. She started at midnight and then forget an entire project because she left it in her locker. Teachers called her gifted. They also called her distractible, high potential, capable of more. My parents heard only the first part. I got A's because I sat down and did the work. Not flashy. Reliable. Spreadsheets before anyone in my grade knew what spreadsheets were. Color-coded folders. Flashcards. Study schedules taped inside my closet. Teachers called me disciplined. Organized. Mature. My parents heard only the second part of that too. To them, Vanessa's talent was natural and therefore more valuable. My effort was visible and therefore less special. That is how certain families think. The thing that comes easily counts more than the thing that lasts. At 8, I came home with a near-perfect report card. 1 A- in math. Everything else solid. I put it on the kitchen counter while my mother was draining pasta. Steam rising. The radio low by the sink. Vanessa was at the table coloring half-heartedly and humming to herself. My mother glanced at the paper and said, "Very nice." Then Vanessa handed over a vocabulary quiz. 9 to 12. Not a report card. Just one quiz. My mother lit up. "See, there it is. I told you your reading instincts were stronger than the teacher realized." My father came in from the garage right then, loosened his tie, and looked at both papers. He tapped Vanessa's quiz. "She's got potential." Then he looked at my report card. "And Elise, well, you're dependable. That matters too." Too, that word, always an afterthought disguised as inclusion. I asked, "Because children still try then. What does that mean?" My father poured iced tea into a glass and said, "It means your sister could really become something big if she applies herself. You? You're more practical. There's nothing wrong with that." Vanessa kept coloring. My mother said nothing. I remember standing there in my school shoes with my backpack still on, feeling the entire shape of my family shift into focus before I had language for why it hurt. There's nothing wrong with that. The sentence people use when they are quietly placing a ceiling over your head. After that, the comparisons became a system. Vanessa got a private SAT prep tutor in 10th grade after one bad practice exam because my father said she was too smart not to polish. When I asked if I could take the same course 2 years later, my mother said, "You don't need all that pressure. You do better when you just work steadily." Vanessa got driving lessons with a professional instructor because my father said confidence mattered behind the wheel. I learned from my Aunt Sharon in an old Toyota that smelled like mint gum and dog hair because, according to my mother, "You're less high-strung. You'll be fine." Vanessa forgot her orchestra fees twice and still got to go on the spring trip because my parents didn't want her to miss an opportunity. When I needed $80 for an academic competition hotel deposit, my father asked if it was really necessary. That was the part outsiders never saw. Not open cruelty. Resource philosophy. Hope flowing one direction. Practicality flowing the other. If you had asked my parents then, they would have said they supported both daughters. And technically, they did. In the way, a plant by a sunny window and a plant in the hallway are both still inside the house. By middle school, Vanessa had learned how to wear their faith in her like a second skin. She was not evil. That matters. She was simply raised in an atmosphere that translated every stumble into promise and every success into identity. When you grow up, favored, confidence feels like accuracy. She would leave projects late, then pull them together the night before, and grin when the grade came back better than expected. She'd say things like, "I just think differently than teachers want," or, "I'm not worried. I always land." My parents loved those lines. They sounded cinematic. Meanwhile, I was up at 6 reviewing notes before exams and turning work in a week early because the idea of failure lived in my body like a weather alert. No one ever praised that in the same voice. Prepared girls do not get called brilliant. They get called safe. At 13, I won a statewide essay contest on civic leadership. There was a luncheon. A certificate. A $300 scholarship that would sit in an account until college. My principal called the house personally. My mother told me she was proud. Then added, "This is exactly what suits you. Serious writing. Thoughtful things. Vanessa is more of a spark." A spark. I was apparently a filing cabinet. Even compliments came with architecture. The year Vanessa turned 16, she decided she wanted to be a lawyer. Not because she had some specific passion for law, because a debate team coach told her she was persuasive and looked composed under pressure. My father acted like Harvard had called personally. He bought her a leather portfolio from an office store and said, "You could argue in front of the Supreme Court someday." She got a B- in history that same quarter and burst into tears at dinner because the teacher hated original thinkers. My mother rubbed her back while my father said, "The system doesn't always know what to do with true potential." I sat there with my own report card folded in my backpack. Straight as. Top in chemistry. No one asked. That night, I spread my homework across the floor of my room and told myself I did not care. I cared so much it was making me quiet in self-defense. That became my pattern. Vanessa absorbed attention. I built structure. She got language. I got silence. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes it is storage. By high school, teachers started noticing the split more clearly than my family did. Mrs. Garrison, my AP English teacher, once kept me after class and said, "Has anyone talked to you about selective scholarships yet?" I shook my head. She frowned. "With your writing and GPA?" I shrugged. At 16, shrugging is often how girls survive being underestimated at home. She reached into her desk, pulled out a list, and circled 3 summer programs. "Apply," she said, "and don't wait for someone else to tell you you're allowed." That sentence cracked something open in me. Permission had never really been the problem. I had already learned how to do things without applause. But being seen accurately by an adult felt like oxygen. I applied. Got into 2. 1 in Chicago. 1 at Northwestern. Academic leadership and policy seminars. Both partially funded. My father refused to pay the travel costs for either www. Too expensive. Too far. Too impractical. 3 weeks later, he paid for Vanessa to attend a pre-law leadership conference in Nashville because networking matters if she's serious. I remember standing in the hallway listening to him explain the expense to my mother. It's an investment in where she's headed. That phrase stayed with me. Investment in where she's headed. Not where she was. Not what she had done. Where she was headed. Potential is the future tense of favoritism. I learned that young. So I started making my own investments. Ibebisset. Tutored freshman algebra. Worked Saturdays at a bakery that opened before sunrise and left sugar in the seams of my clothes. I saved every check. By senior year, I had enough for application fees, a used laptop upgrade, and part of my dorm deposit. Not enough to be free. Enough not to be trapped. Vanessa, meanwhile, was still supposedly destined for extraordinary things. Except by then, the shine was coming off in places my parents kept trying to polish. Her grades slipped. Not disastrously. Unevenly. She was still strong in classes she liked, weak in classes that required persistence, and brilliant in interviews where adults could be charmed before they checked details. She joined student government, then forgot meeting schedules, led a fundraiser, then lost the receipts, started a mentorship initiative, then got bored when actual logistics showed up. Each time, my parents found a story that kept her brilliance intact. She's overwhelmed because she's capable of so much. She's bored because school doesn't challenge her. She's distracted because gifted minds aren't linear. I once got quiet halfway through dinner while listening to one of these speeches, and my father looked at me and said, "Don't roll your eyes. Your sister has gifts you don't." I hadn't rolled my eyes. I was chewing. That did not matter. I said, "I know." And I did. She had gifts. So did I. That was never the issue. The issue was that hers were treated like destiny, and mine were treated like compensation. When college applications started, the house turned into a command center for Vanessa. Essay drafts on the printer. Tour brochures on the kitchen island. My mother comparing merit packages for schools Vanessa had not even bothered to research fully because she needs options. My father took vacation time to drive her to 2 campus visits. He bought her a blazer for interviews. He called an old fraternity friend whose niece worked in admissions somewhere and spoke about connections. I filled out my own FAFSA at the public library because our internet kept cutting out, and my father was using the home computer to help Vanessa workshop a personal statement about justice and leadership. Justice and leadership. From the girl who could not remember to return borrowed notebooks, I applied mostly to state schools with strong scholarship programs. Not because I lacked imagination, because I had bills in my imagination too. By then I knew something nobody in my family had said aloud. Potential is cheap to praise. Results are expensive to build. I planned to major in economics. Not because it was romantic. Because I was good at systems. Good at numbers. Good at watching where resources actually flowed instead of where people claimed they were going. I liked the honesty of it. Inputs. Outputs. Incentives. Risk. Families. It turns out, run on those too. When I told my father my plan, he made a face like he had bitten into something disappointing. Economics? Yes. He shrugged. Well, that's practical. I guess, good for you. Good for you. The phrase adults use when they have no emotional budget left for what you chose. When Vanessa announced political science with a possible law track, my father nearly stood up from the table. "There it is," he said. "That makes sense." My mother smiled at Vanessa like a photographer had just asked for warmth. You'll be incredible. I was sitting right there. The room didn't even flinch. At graduation from high school, Vanessa wore extra mascara, cried in all the right photos, and got 3 separate relatives telling her they could picture her in court one day. I graduated the same weekend in the same cap and gown and got Aunt Sharon handing me a $20 bill tucked in a card that said, "For sensible shoes later." To this day, I am not sure if she meant well or simply knew what role my family had assigned me. Probably both. College widened the distance between reality and family myth. Vanessa went first, 1 year ahead of me, to a private university outside Cincinnati with a partial scholarship my parents treated like a Nobel Prize. They stretched to cover the rest. Not fully, but enough. Room decor, a meal plan upgrade, parking fees, last-minute textbook costs, emergency cash transfers when she overspent, a monthly allowance labeled support while my father told friends, "We're making sacrifices because she's got a future worth backing." I heard that sentence on speakerphone one Sunday while my mother was folding towels. She did not turn the volume down. Maybe she forgot I was in the room. Maybe some part of her thought I needed to hear the logic clearly. Maybe she had stopped noticing the cuts because she had helped build the knife. I started college a year later at Ohio State on a scholarship package I had assembled like a survival raft. Merit aid, departmental grant, campus job, a small loan I hated but accepted. I moved into a dorm room with cinder block walls and a window that looked out on a bike rack and thought, this counts, even if no one claps. It had to count. Because there was no other sustainable way to live. Before I tell you what happened next, type, prove it, if you've ever had to build your own value in a house that had already decided what you were worth. Because some families don't destroy you by saying you're nothing. They destroy you by saying you're useful and making you grateful for the smaller label. College was the first place where no one knew I was Vanessa's sister. That mattered more than I expected. No inherited script. No family shorthand. No one preloading me as the steady one or the practical one or the daughter who did well but did not have the thing. I got to be a body moving through a system that only cared, at least at first, about what I actually did. And what I did was work. I attended every lecture, took color-coded notes, joined an economics student association, mostly for access to internship postings and free pizza, worked 10 hours a week at the library, reshelving journals and another 8 in the campus tutoring center by sophomore spring. I learned how to calculate my grocery budget down to the week. How to make oatmeal feel like dinner if you added enough cinnamon. How to smile at wealthier girls complaining about parking tickets while deciding which months I could refill my prescription before the copay felt unsafe. It was hard, but it was clean. Effort went in. Results came out. No one told me some other girl in the room simply had more potential. Meanwhile, Vanessa's story began slipping in ways my parents kept narrating as temporary. She changed majors once, then added a minor she never finished, then dropped a class because the professor was condescending, then another because she was burned out and unsupported. Every semester there was a new explanation that preserved the central myth. She wasn't failing. She was mismanaged by inferior systems. My parents absorbed every word. My father would stand in the kitchen with his reading glasses perched at the end of his nose and say things like, "Some kids aren't meant for these boxed-in structures." My mother would add, "She's still finding her real lane." Real lane. As if the road itself owed her better weather. At the same time, I was pulling near-perfect grades in intermediate microeconomics, statistics, and policy analysis, while quietly learning a truth that changed my life. There is nothing glamorous about consistency. That is why weak people overlook it. But consistency compounds. Charm gets invited into rooms. Consistency owns them later. I did not say that out loud then. I just kept going. At the end of my freshman year, I made the dean's list. No family scandal. No surprise reveal. Just a PDF posted online and an email from the college congratulating me on academic distinction. I forwarded it to my parents because some part of me still wanted to test whether achievement, without comparison attached, could earn straightforward pride. My mother replied, "Wonderful job. Honey, keep being disciplined." My father replied 2 days later, "Nice work. Your sister says college is more political than academic anyway." That was his response. Not to my accomplishment, to her grievance. I stared at the message on the bus back from campus and laughed once under my breath, because by then the pattern had become almost too obvious to hurt the old way. Almost. Pain doesn't disappear when it becomes predictable. It just stops introducing itself. By the time I was a sophomore, Vanessa had transferred schools, then taken a semester off, then unofficially moved back home, while my parents referred to the situation as recalibration. She worked part-time at a boutique for about 6 weeks, quit because the manager was passive-aggressive, and started talking again about law school as if ambition alone were a major. When I came home for Thanksgiving that year, she was draped across the couch in one of our mother's cardigans, scrolling on her phone while my father carved turkey and said, "For at least the 20th time in my life, your sister has potential. She just needs the right environment." Then he looked at me and added, "Not everyone is built for big swings. Elise, some people are better at slow, steady wins." The whole table went quiet for a second. Not because anyone was shocked, because everyone heard it. My cousin Rachel looked down at her plate. Aunt Sharon took a long sip of wine. My mother adjusted the gravy spoon as if tableware could absorb tension. I smiled. Not warmly. Not bitterly. Just with the tired accuracy of someone finally understanding the math. "What happens?" I asked. "When the swing never lands?" My father frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means at some point potential should probably buy groceries." No one moved. Vanessa sat upright immediately. "There it is," she said. "You always do this. You act superior because you're boring enough to be reliable." That line actually impressed me. Cruel. Yes. But elegant. It contained the whole family narrative in one sentence. I looked at her. "And you act inevitable because Mom and Dad mistake excuses for talent." My mother gasped softly. My father set down the carving knife. "Elise." The warning in his voice was instant. Vanessa's eyes filled. Of course they did. She had spent her whole life being protected by the emotional consequences of conflict. I stood, took my plate to the sink, and said, "I have a paper due Sunday." Then I left the room before anyone could turn my refusal into disrespect. Upstairs in my old bedroom, with the faded curtains and the closet still smelling faintly of cedar blocks, I realized something I should have understood years earlier. I was never going to be re-seen inside that house. Not accurately. Not while their need for Vanessa to be extraordinary depended on me staying ordinary by contrast. That was the real betrayal. Not preference. Identity management. And once I understood that, my relationship to success changed. It stopped being a petition. It became an exit route. By junior year, I had an internship lined up with a policy research group in Columbus. Unpaid at first. Then partially funded after I proved useful enough to keep. I analyzed labor data, built clean spreadsheet models, and discovered I loved turning messy social stories into visible structures. Housing, wages, access, incentivos, the hidden logic under public language. It felt familiar for reasons I did not discuss with anyone then. My supervisor, Dr. Nina Torres, was the first person in my field to look at my work and say, "You think like someone who notices what people pretend not to see?" I went back to my little apartment that night, sat on the floor because I had not bought a proper chair yet, and cried over takeout noodles. Not because I was fragile, because being recognized accurately after years of distortion does something to the nervous system. It feels like rescue. By senior year, I had a tree, 94 GPA, 2 faculty mentors, a research paper selected for a regional undergraduate conference, and another Dean's List notification sitting in my inbox like quiet proof. Vanessa, meanwhile, had re-enrolled in a communications program at a local branch campus after announcing that traditional academic culture was toxic. My parents rallied instantly. This was her comeback. Her reshet, her real shot. My mother bought her new notebooks and a laptop sleeve. My father said things like, "A lot of successful people start late." Which is true. But in our house, lateness only counted as strategic when Vanessa was the one behind. I did not resent her for struggling. That is the nuance people miss. I resented the interpretation. The way every one of her stumbles got converted into mythic future greatness, while my actual outcomes were treated like evidence of a smaller, less interesting kind of life. When graduation season approached, the family narrative was already written. Vanessa had finally found herself. I was simply finishing on time. My mother kept saying it like a compliment. "Your sister had to fight for clarity. You've always been so linear." Linear. Another word that sounded positive and meant reduced. My father started planning a combined graduation lunch so both daughters could be equally celebrated. By equally, he meant emotionally centered around Vanessa's resilience and politely inclusive of my transcript. I knew this before the first reservation was even made. At one Sunday dinner in April, he said, "This will be good for the family. 2 daughters graduating together. One finally stepping into who she is. The other proving that persistence matters." I looked at my water glass. Across from me, Vanessa was already smiling the smile of someone pre-processing applause. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel angry. I felt ready. Because there was one detail none of them knew. Not yet. And it was already printed. The detail none of them knew was that I had made the Dean's List every single year of college. Not once. Not by accident. Every year. Quietly. Consistently. My university sent the final graduation program draft to participating departments in late April. And my advisor, Dr. Torres, forwarded me the section listing honors notation. There it was. My name. Elise Carter Dean's List Distinction. Not a flashy title. Not a medal around my neck. But visible. Printed. Official. And because the combined family graduation lunch was scheduled around Vanessa's ceremony first and mine second, I knew exactly how the day was going to begin. With them celebrating the wrong story. That should have made me want revenge in some loud cinematic way. It didn't. What I wanted was witness. Just once. Not a private email. Not another careful compliment from a professor. Not one more accomplishment folded away into the family filing cabinet, labeled Elise is fine. I wanted the truth to appear where they could not edit it with tone. Graduation weekend arrived warm and windy. One of those Midwestern May weekends where everything smells like cut grass. Pavement. And sunscreen. My mother had bought a new dress. Pale blue. The kind of dress women buy when they expect to be seen in photos they will revisit for years. My father wore the same navy blazer he always chose for milestone events. The one that made him stand straighter and talk louder. Vanessa came downstairs the morning of her ceremony with perfect hair, glossed lips, and the kind of anticipatory brightness that only exists in people who have spent their lives assuming the day will rise to meet them. She looked beautiful. She also looked untroubled in a way I had never been at any major event in my life. That was the difference between us. I had learned to prepare for disappointment before applause. She had learned applause would usually arrive first. As we got into the car, my mother said, "I still can't believe we get to celebrate both our girls this weekend." Both our girls? That line would have been sweet in another family. In mine, it usually meant brace for imbalance with a ribbon on it. My father checked traffic on his phone and said, "Big day for your sister." Then, a second later, glancing at me in the rearview mirror, "And yours too." Of course. Of course. That phrase is the cousin of two. A courtesy tag attached after the main emotional investment has already been placed elsewhere. Vanessa's graduation was held first at the branch campus fieldhouse. Smaller crowd. Metal folding chairs. Families dressed in spring event clothes and carrying flowers that looked brighter than the building deserved. I sat between my mother and Aunt Sharon while names were read. Vanessa crossed the stage gracefully, smiling the exact smile she had practiced in mirrors since she was 13. My father stood to clap. Stood. He whistled once. Low, but sharp enough to turn heads. My mother cried. Vanessa took her diploma cover, waved toward our section, and somehow managed to look both grateful and already nostalgic for her own triumph. At lunch afterward, the family gathered at a restaurant near campus with brick walls, hanging Edison bulbs, and a menu full of elevated comfort food, trying very hard to justify its prices. The table was long enough for cousins, spouses, my Aunt Sharon, my Uncle Dave, and 2 family friends. My mother had invited because they had watched the girls grow up. I should have heard the danger in that phrase. Watch the girls grow up. As if we had grown in the same climate. As if the same light had reached us. My father ordered a round of sparkling drinks before everyone had even settled. He raised his glass and said, "To Vanessa, for finally showing everyone what we always knew was there." Finally showing everyone. There it was. Not just congratulations. Narrative protection. The whole table smiled toward her. Vanessa touched her chest, like the praise embarrassed her. It did not. She lived on that oxygen. I smiled too, because by then I was not shocked anymore. That kind of favoritism loses some of its power once you stop asking it to become love. Then my mother asked, she always had that spark. Aunt Sharon nodded. She did. Someone else said, you can tell when a child is meant for bigger things. Meant for bigger things. Across the table, Uncle Dave glanced at me and then down at his menu too fast. At least one person heard the shape of the omission. I took a sip of water, cold enough to hurt my teeth. My father turned to me then, as if remembering there was a second daughter in the room and wanting credit for inclusion. And Elisa, he said, smiling, has always been our steady one. Hardworking. No drama. You know exactly what you're getting. Several people murmured approvingly, because that is the violence of a family label when said with a smile. Everyone else hears praise. Only you hear the cage closing. Vanessa leaned back in her chair and laughed lightly. Elise loves structure more than oxygen. The table laughed. Not cruelly. That was the part that almost undid me. When a family has repeated something long enough, even the joke version becomes communal furniture. I looked at Vanessa, then at my father, then around the table at all the people who had watched us for years and somehow managed never to ask why one daughter's future had always been spoken about like weather and the others like office supply. And for a second, I almost said nothing. That old instinct rose fast. Keep the peace. Finish the meal. Save yourself the cost of being called sensitive later. Then my phone buzzed in my lap. An email. From my department administrator. Final commencement programs available at student services before ceremony. I looked at the screen, then locked it. And just like that, the hesitation disappeared. Not because I was angry, because I was done donating my silence to a version of the family story that required me to stay secondary forever. I set my glass down and said, calmly, it's interesting. My mother looked up. What is? That everyone keeps talking about potential like it's more impressive than results? The table shifted. Vanessa smiled in a way that suggested she thought this might become one of those moments where I tried to sound deep and ended up sounding defensive. My father gave a small warning chuckle. Elise. But I kept going. I'm serious. We've spent years talking about who had the most promise, who had the spark, who was headed for bigger things. I looked directly at him. At some point, shouldn't we ask what any of that actually produced? The table went very still. My mother's face tightened. Vanessa's smile dropped first. Then came the offense. Aunt Sharon looked at her plate. Uncle Dave reached for his iced tea and did not drink it. My father set down his fork. What exactly are you trying to say? I met his eyes. That maybe I'm tired of being described like background furniture while everyone waits for Vanessa to become the future. Vanessa let out a short laugh. Oh my God. Not because she found it funny. Because favored people often cannot imagine the other person has reached their limit until it is already speaking. My mother said, softly, this is not the time. I looked at her. When is the time? No answer. Of course not. There is never a convenient time to confront a family myth. That is why they survive so long. Vanessa crossed her arms. You're acting like nobody cares about what you do. I turned to her. No, I'm acting like everyone has spent 20 years narrating us, as if your possibility was somehow more meaningful than my actual work. There it was. Clean. Plain. True. My father's face darkened. You always do this. Do what? Make things ugly because you can't stand not being the center of attention. That sentence hit the table like a dropped plate. Not because it was new. Because it was so perfectly wrong, it exposed the whole architecture. I laughed once. Actually laughed. And that startled him more than anger would have. I can't stand not being the center of attention, I repeated. Dad, I built my whole personality around surviving your family without asking for any. That shut him up for one full beat. Then my mother did what she always did. She reached for moderation like it was a sacrament. Elise. Honey. Nobody is diminishing you. We are celebrating both daughters. By saying she has the future and I'm dependable? My mother opened her mouth. Closed it. Vanessa leaned forward. You know what? Maybe they talk about my potential because I think bigger than you do. There was the sister I knew beneath the polished version. Not evil. Just profoundly accustomed to being interpreted generously. I looked at her and felt something unexpected. Not hatred. Sadness. Because confidence fed by unfairness is still a distortion, even when the person wearing it mistakes it for identity. I said, no. They talk about your potential because it allows them to postpone noticing outcomes. That was the line. The one that made the whole table understand we had crossed from discomfort into truth. My father stood up halfway. Enough to signal authority. Not enough to leave. That's enough. I shook my head. No, it isn't. Then I stood too. The room around us kept moving in restaurant ways. Servers weaving through aisles. Plates clinking. A baby crying somewhere near the bar. And right in the middle of ordinary lunch noise, my whole childhood was standing up with me. I'm not doing this to ruin her graduation. I said, I'm doing it because I'm tired of a family story where Vanessa is always becoming, and I'm only ever useful. Vanessa's eyes filled instantly. Again. Of course. That old family reflex almost kicked in then. The sight of her tears and everyone's nervous tilt toward protecting them. But I had seen enough by then to know the difference between someone being hurt and someone being centered by habit. My father pointed at me like I was a witness who had gone hostile. You have always been jealous of your sister. I looked at his hand, then at him. No. I said, I've been accurately observing you. You could feel the air change after that. Because jealousy is convenient. Observation is evidence. And men like my father prefer emotional motives to factual ones, whenever facts threaten the system that flatters them. My mother whispered, Please. Aunt Sharon finally spoke. Very quietly. She has a point. Everyone turned. Including me. Aunt Sharon had spent years in the family doing the thing women of her generation often did best. Seeing everything. Naming almost nothing. My father stared at her. What? She kept her eyes on her napkin. You've always talked about Vanessa like she was on the verge of greatness, and Elise like she was helpful. Helpful. Aunt Sharon, of all people, had found the word. That loosened something in Uncle Dave, too. He cleared his throat. Honestly, I've noticed it. Vanessa looked blindsided. Genuinely. That was almost the saddest part. She had lived so long inside the story that she thought it was just reality. My mother's face flushed. Howard, Aunt Sharon said, finally looking at my father. You do this thing where effort doesn't count unless it comes with drama. Elise has been excelling for years. My father scoffed. Excelling? The contempt in that one word sharpened me more than the entire lunch had. Because there it was again. Not denial of facts. Contempt for the category itself when applied to me. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, opened the PDF Dr. Torres had sent weeks earlier, and slid it across the table toward him. What would you call this? He frowned. Did not pick it up. My mother did. Her eyes moved across the screen, then widened. Vanessa leaned over before she could stop herself. Aunt Sharon adjusted her glasses. My mother looked up slowly. Elise. I said nothing. My father finally took the phone. Read. Read again. He looked at me. Then at the screen. Then back at me. Because there it was. Black text on white light. Official. Simple. Not a speech. Not a plea. A record. Elise Carter Dean's List distinction. My father said. After too long. What is this? I almost smiled. Because even then, the man wanted categories before feelings. It's the graduation notation list. My mother's mouth was still slightly open. You made the dean's list? I looked at her. Every year. Not louder. That would have ruined it. Just clear. Every year. The table went silent in a whole new way, then. This was no longer about fairness in a vague emotional sense. This was about evidence they had not cared enough to ask for. Vanessa blinked. Once. Twice. Then laughed softly in disbelief. Every year? Yes. No elaboration. No cushioning. Nothing for them to reinterpret. My father looked offended before he looked impressed. That told me everything. Why didn't you tell us? That question lit something cold and bright in me. I stared at him. Then at my mother. Then around the table, at the people who had heard my family narrate me for years, as if I were emotionally durable office equipment. Finally, I answered, I did. My mother frowned. When? I held her gaze. Emails. End of semester calls. That time I forwarded the first notice freshman year, and Dad replied about Vanessa saying college was political. My mother went still. Because now she remembered. Maybe not the details. Enough. I turned to my father. You didn't forget because I hid it. You forgot because it didn't fit the version of me you were using. That was the sentence that broke him. Not dramatically, but visibly. His mouth tightened. His shoulders stiffened. The man who had spent my whole life deciding what kind of daughter I was now had to face the simpler truth. He had not been inattentive. He had been selective. Vanessa spoke next. And for once there was no polish in her voice. You made the dean's list every year and never said anything to me? I looked at her. There are questions that sound wounded, but contain no curiosity about the harm done in the opposite direction. This was one of those. I learned early that nothing in this family counted if it didn't match the story first. That hit her harder than the list had. Because it implicated her too. Fairly. Not cruelly. Just truly. Before I tell you what happened next, type scene. If you know what it feels like when people don't hate you enough to attack you, they just overlook you enough to erase your best work. Because sometimes neglect is not loud. Sometimes it wears a proud smile and calls you practical. Lunch dissolved after that. Not instantly. In stages. My mother tried to repair tone. My father retreated into offended silence. Vanessa cried in the bathroom for 15 minutes while Aunt Sharon followed and came back looking older somehow. The checks arrived. The waiter pretended not to notice the tension thick enough to tip over. No one said dessert. No one suggested more photos. When we finally left the restaurant, the sun outside was too bright. The parking lot shimmered with heat. My father walked ahead of everyone, keys in hand. Like movement itself could restore rank. My mother touched my arm near the passenger side door. Why didn't you ever tell me how much this hurt? That question almost took me out at the knees. Not because it was cruel. Because it was so late. I looked at her. At the woman who had watched 2 daughters grow up under the same roof and still needed an explanation after 20 years. I thought you could see. She started crying then. Quietly. Publicly. That mattered less than she probably hoped. Because tears are not vision. I had needed vision. Vanessa did not speak to me the whole drive to my ceremony. She sat in the back seat looking out the window with her makeup repaired too quickly and badly. My father drove in silence. My mother kept twisting a tissue in her lap. The only person who texted me anything clean that afternoon was Dr. Torres. Proud of you. Go enjoy your day. I almost laughed in the parking garage when I read it. Because the only uncomplicated pride waiting for me that day was not coming from blood. My ceremony was held in a much larger arena. Rows of graduates in black caps. Families flooding the entrances with flowers. Cameras. And the stunned expressions people wear when time becomes visible all at once. I walked with my department toward our section and felt something I had never felt at a family event before. Freedom. Because the arena did not care who my parents thought had more potential. The program was printed. The distinction was listed. The work was done. Nothing inside me had to argue anymore. When names were read and students with honors notation were recognized, there was a small pause after mine. Not long. Just enough. Just enough for the audience to hear. Just enough for my family to understand that the thing they had overlooked was not minor. Not accidental. Not hidden. After the ceremony, families spilled out into the bright afternoon with bouquets and phones held high. My mother hugged me first. Hard. Like she was trying to hold 2 decades and 1 apology in the same pair of arms. I'm sorry, she whispered into my hair. There it was. Small. Late. Real. I believed she meant it. I also knew meaning and repair were not the same thing. So I nodded and said, I know. My father stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He looked uncomfortable in his own body. Good. Some truths need to cost posture before they can cost pride. When he finally stepped forward, he said, Congratulations. Not warm. Not cold. Just stripped. Maybe that was the most honest voice I had ever heard from him. Thank you, I said. He nodded once. Then, After a long silence, I didn't realize. I looked at him. The graduation crowd moved around us. Families laughing. Balloons knocking lightly against the ceiling. A little girl in a cap too big for her head running past with a rose clutched in both hands. Everything around us looked like uncomplicated joy. It made our honesty feel almost private. "You didn't look?" I said. He flinched. Not visibly to anyone else. To me, that mattered. Vanessa approached then, slower than usual. All her usual certainty burned down into something more recognizable. Human. Finally, "I didn't know either," she said. I studied her face. For the first time in our lives, she looked like someone who understood the possibility that the role she had been given was never neutral. I said, "You didn't need to know. You just needed not to enjoy it." She swallowed. That landed. Good. Because family systems do not only harm through the people who build them, they also harm through the people who wear them comfortably. She cried again, but softer, less strategically. "I'm sorry." I believed she meant that too. And just like with my mother, meaning still was not the whole repair. That would take longer. More truth. Less ceremony. A smaller table than the one we had always used. We took photos after that. Not because everything was fixed. Because life keeps producing pictures before people have emotionally caught up. In the photos, I am smiling. Truly smiling. That surprises people when they hear this story. They expect bitterness to ruin the ending. It didn't. Because the point was never humiliating Vanessa, and it was never hearing my parents finally say the exact right sentence in the exact right tone. The point was this. The record existed without their permission. By fall, I had accepted a research fellowship in public policy and labor economics in Chicago. Good funding. Good mentor. A city big enough to hold a new version of me without immediate reference to the old one. My mother called the night before I moved and asked if I wanted help packing. I let her come. That mattered too. Not reconciliation exactly, but a first adult choice. We folded clothes in my apartment while late summer heat pressed against the windows. And after 20 quiet minutes, she said, "I used to think if I softened your father's words, that counted as protecting you." I kept folding. "It didn't." She nodded. "I know." It was the second honest thing she had said to me that year. Those are not enough to rebuild a childhood. They are enough to start telling the truth about it. Vanessa and I took longer. Of course we did. Sibling favoritism does not end when the parents are exposed. It leaves residue. She had to learn that being loved unfairly had also limited her. I had to learn that my competence was not a personality replacement. We speak now. Carefully. Better than before. Not because one lunch fixed us. Because once the family story breaks in public, nobody can fully go back to speaking it with the same ease. My father never apologized the way a movie father would. No speech. No full confession. What he did instead was smaller and, in some ways, more difficult. He stopped comparing us. That was it. No fanfare. Just absence. No more talk of potential at every meal. No more steady daughter language. No more using Vanessa's future as the main event, and my work as the responsible side dish. Silence. From a man like him, was not nothing. It was surrender in a dialect he could bear to speak. And me? I stopped trying to earn retrospective fairness from people who had only learned to recognize value once other institutions printed it first. That changed my whole life. In work, in friendship, in love. In every room where someone underestimated the quiet girl because she did not announce herself like weather. I learned to trust accumulation, not charm, not early applause, not the dramatic promise of becoming Len. Just the mathematics of showing up, doing the work, and letting consistency turn invisible effort into something no one can plausibly deny forever. So when people ask what it felt like that day, when both daughters graduated and only one name made the dean's list, I tell them this: it did not feel like revenge. Not exactly. Revenge is too loud. It felt like correction. The kind that arrives without screaming. The kind that forces a whole room to update its understanding whether it wants to or not. The kind that teaches you, finally, that potential is only impressive until results walk in wearing your name. If this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe. And if you were ever the child they called practical while betting on someone else's future, type "I was the result" in the comments. Because some of us were never the family favorite. We were the family proof.